TOPP program, that is Transition to Organic Partnership Program. Today is the first of 4 events that we'll be producing in 2023, the remainder of this year, to help growers in our region. We're based in Colorado and very pleased again to be working for quite some time now in the organic food and agriculture industry. I want to introduce our panelists today and have them talk a little bit about themselves before we dive into some presentations. The first is Tina Owens. These are all world-renowned experts in organic agriculture, by the way, so we're really, again, honored to be working with these folks today. Tina Owens is a senior fellow of Regenerative Agriculture, leading the Nutrient Density Alliance, a program within the Soil and Climate Alliance at Green America. Tina has been working as a sustainability leader within the organic sector since 2008 for several of the largest organic brands in the world, including enabling thousands of acres of farmland transitioning to organic. Gene Kelly is a professor of pedology. I just learned that word myself, even though I've been in agriculture a long time. It's soil science. He's the deputy director of the Colorado Agricultural Experiment Station and is the associate director for research in the School of Global Environmental Sustainability at Colorado State University, Colorado's land-grant university, with a great specialization in agriculture. His scientific specialization is in pedology and geochemistry, primary interests in the biological weathering of soil, and studies the soil degradation and global biogeochemical cycles. And that was not easy for me to say. He serves as an advisor to the U.S. Department of Agriculture with the National Cooperative Soil Survey, the National Science Foundation. National Science Foundation actually gave me a couple of scholarships, Gene, long time ago, set me on my path, and several major research programs. He'll talk more about that. And last but certainly not least, a gentleman whose work I greatly admire, Philip Taylor, Ph.D., Executive Director of Madag Agriculture. He is a career global ecologist specialized in ecosystem and soil carbon cycling. His work has been published in numerous journals, including Nature, Climate Change, and Ecology. He has diverse international experience in both private and public sectors. This summer, he's been working with organic farmers all over the Plain States, so we look forward to hearing from him as well. Now, we want to thank everyone who's joined us today. Really thrilled. We have a significant registration for today's live event. We will be recording this event. So if you want to watch it again, or in case you missed it, we'll be sharing the link to the recording. We'll also be sharing the presentations with all registrants so that you can take a look at some of the resources that our speakers will be presenting. We'll also have a Q&A, but please feel free to use the chat room to ask your questions along the way as I moderate. There may be some questions that really are of relevance to the immediate discussion, so please don't hesitate. Also, we have a couple questions for you, as you can see on this slide that Allison Salvati is sharing with you in the Zoom chat. If you could tell us your occupation, how you're associated with organic, or your interest level, what state you live in, where are you in the transition process? Are you considering organic curious? Are you in transition to organic right now? What are some of the challenges you may be facing, questions you might have for our panelists, or you're already an organic farmer and producer and you're here for interest and support us, and thank you very much. Again, yours truly, Stephen Hoffman with Compass Natural. I've been in the organic industry since 1985. I attended the very first meeting of the Organic Trade Association before it was even called the Organic Trade Association. I think it was called OFPANA, the Organic Food Production Association of North America. And we were there when the National Organic Law was passed in 1991, covering the market in 2001, when it actually came on with the USDA certified organic seal. I'm a former extension agent myself with Penn State University. So I'm very, very honored. It feels full circle to be part of USDA's TOPP program promoting agricultural extension education, and this time in assisting farmers with the transition to organic. Thank you again very much for attending today. Tina, I'd like to start with you. If you could just take a moment, give us a little bit about your background, and we'll hear from all our speakers before we dive into our presentations. And again, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So in addition to what you shared, just mentioning, as you said, I've been in the organic industry since 2008, working on some of the largest organic brands that moved from the natural and organic kind of dusty store shelves into the mainstream retailer space, which helped lead to some of the exponential growth in organic that we'll talk about in a moment. The only other thing I would add is that I am a regenerative and organic farmer. Hello from my farm in Michigan, where my husband and I raise pastured pork, lamb, turkeys, ducks, chickens, geese, and bees with organic supplementation. And so I'll be delighted to share more with you about the organic marketplace, what consumers believe about organic, and why it is important to be transitioning to organic processes. I'll kick it back to you, Steve, for the next introduction.
Thank you, Tina. Gene Kelly from Colorado State University. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. And again, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. In addition to the great introductory remarks you made, I'm basically a soil scientist. I've been studying soils for over 30 years, almost 40 years, I hate to say, mostly in the Western Great Plains, but all over the world, and very interested in soil degradation. Obviously, when organic agriculture started taking stride, it's an opportunity to regenerate our systems. And so what I hope to present today are some of the major challenges that we faced in water-limited systems, and I'll focus on that. And we'll be talking with a couple of examples from the current literature, and then we'll open it up for questions. But again, honored to be here. And I'm actually speaking from the Western Colorado Research Center out here in Grand Valley. We're having a field day today. I've got 100 and some odd farmers right out the door, so I can bring them in as well. So anyway, everybody have a good day.
Gene, thank you. So right now you're inside, but otherwise today you'll be a scientist outstanding in your field.
Absolutely. Yeah, this entire week, actually. So
also, you brought up something interesting. Your study is soil degradation, but you also brought up that term regeneration. Mm-hmm. And I think the power of organic is in its ability to regenerate and revitalize the soil. Yeah. It all starts there, the difference between living, vital soils and soils that have been depleted and degraded. And again, I think that's where it all starts.
Absolutely.
Phil, I'm sure you are in agreement there with your own insights, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey toward mad agriculture.
Yeah. First, great to be here. Great to see everyone on the panel and some familiar faces in the attendee list. Goodness, introduction. I would say I'm just like wildly in love with the earth and what it wants to be. And that question of what does the earth want to be? What does the earth need us to be? What does that reciprocity look like really shapes my days. It shapes the exploration of what regenerative ag is. And that sense of ecological abundance that I think has been greatly diminished by the human enterprise over the last 10,000 years, I think is really, it really can be, I think, focused on agriculture. I mean, agriculture has been arguably the most destructive force on the planet. And I think the kind of power and promise of regeneration is to invert that narrative, invert that myth, and actually use agriculture as the great restorer, the great healer of our relationship to Earth, you know, sort of deconstructing the very anthropocentric kind of view of humanity on this like little orb in the galaxy. And and replaying with all of it, playing with culture, playing with science, playing with art, song, story. I feel like a lot of the ethos of MAD is really kind of founded in this idea that we need to radically reimagine our relationship to Earth if we're going to truly create a viable way forward that solves the large crises of our time, like biodiversity loss and the loss of soil health and climate change. And I think all of those things are outcomes of fundamentally a relationship gone awry. And And so MAD is really kind of that spirit of what is the radicalism that we need, to go about that reimagination, and how do we put it to work, sort of spanning philosophy to practice.
Phil, your approach to this is kind of interesting. I really like what you were saying about, listening to the earth and what it wants, how it wants us to relate to it, because we have to work with Mother Earth and Mother Nature to get the food we need. And again, what comes to mind for me is, basically philosophy is stewardship versus an extractive approach to agriculture, which is what I think even perhaps is accelerated in the last 70 years of agriculture, is a bit of an extractive mindset versus more of a stewardship mindset. And, really when this extractive mindset came to be, there actually also were thought leaders that were thinking about this, the founders of the Soil Association, J. Rodale, folks in the 1940s that were looking at this in a more regenerative approach from the beginning. So organic agriculture is not new. It's actually always been there as a question as we've commercialized and industrialized our food production system. So those are some of the thoughts that you bring to mind for me in listening to everybody. So we're going to go in with our presentations as well. And we're going to start with Tina.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. All right, so let's dive in, folks. Hopefully we'll share a lot of things about the organic systems that are helpful and educational for you. Let's start with talking about the why you might be considering moving into organic agriculture, and that is what the market has to offer you in this space. So most of the information I'm sharing about the market and excluded or consumer interest within organics is from the Organic Trade Association, which is a group of businesses and policy advocacy for the organic industry that is seated in Washington, D.C. There are two reports that I'm focusing on this first slide. If you take a picture of this or screenshot it, you'll see what the addresses are for these two reports in case you'd like to read further. But in a nutshell, the U.S. organic food and sales growth in the last decade has been year on year still steady, strong, and astronomical, with most recently 2022 topping 60 billion in sales. You will be able to read specifics on the various portions of the market, whether it's fruit and veg, dairy, eggs, meat, beverage, etc., depending on what your specific area of interest is and which crops you're intending to grow for the organic marketplace. It also might help you to see which segments are leading, like produce is still the largest category within organic, and beverages such as milk also still have a very strong pull with consumers. So if you want to get really specific about the other areas beyond those top two leaders, feel free to check out that report or to see the overall growth at this other one around sales and incremental growth. Okay, so that's the total marketplace and the fact that it's still growing year on year. Here's some information about where the consumer is at. This is a report from Hartman Group. Hartman, for those of you that don't know, is a research body that is used by most of the large food companies in understanding consumer demand in order for companies to make decisions about what they source and what they ultimately offer to consumers. This report is from, it's about the 2020 consumer. And what you're seeing here across the top is the percentage of households within the US that have purchased one or more organic products within that year. And as you can see, back in 2000, it was at 56%. Now we're at 82%, likely growing since this time. The reason I want to show you this slide, even though it's a couple years old, is because there was an important shift in 2020 that will help you understand the mindset of organic consumers and what they believe is their value proposition when they purchase organic products. So what Hartman is calling out, and by the way, they don't predict things, they're actually talking to consumers and synthesizing this information to help people understand what the mindset is of those that are driving actual purchases at store, is that in 2020, the organic consumers started saying that soil health was a central part of their reason to believe within the value of their organic purchase And that as a result of that soil health factor, that they are connecting that to better flavor, better nutrition, and better ecology, or being better for the planet. So if you're wondering where the organic consumer is at and why they're purchasing, this is a helpful slate to show what you're building upon as you transition into organic. As that organic consumer goes into the grocery store, they are able to purchase several different types of organic products. And a lot of people aren't familiar with the fact that there's all these different layers to organic and what's offered to consumers. And so it's a helpful thing to know as a baseline for how consumers interact with an organic product ultimately. So hopefully this isn't entirely news to you, but there is different regulations around on-pack claims related to organic, the use of the word organic and the use of the organic logo. So products that are 100% organic tend to be few and far between, because it is usually just the straight up grain without many processing aids and or additives within the product. And so you'll see less of these, which is why I have kind of a not well-known product up here demonstrating that something that is 100% organic actually gets to state that on the pack and use the USDA organic logo. Most of what you see within typical grocery stores is 95% organic ingredients. They are still allowed to use the USDA organic logo, and those 5% of ingredients, they have to have an affidavit that they can prove that they tried to source organic products and didn't find them to be readily available. So this could be colors, flavors, or maybe some processing aids that help them get to this ultimate product, but they have to be non-GMO. There's some other affidavits they have to make around it, non-solvent extraction for flavors and colors, et cetera. And so it's not just willy-nilly on that remaining 5%. It does have very strict codes around it. But anytime you see a USDA organic symbol without 100% organic, it's 95% organic, with a couple of caveats on the remaining 5. Made with organic, here's a great example from Goldfish, is when a product meets a 70% organic threshold, and on that remaining 30%, again, it's not willy-nilly. They have to assert that it is not GMO, that there's no irradiation, that there's no sewage sludge, and that there's no solvent extraction in the colors, flavors, et cetera. But a reason the company might do made with organic is that the 30% of ingredients might be difficult for them to source organically, or it might push them into a price threshold that their consumer data says that consumers aren't willing to pay. So for example, with Goldfish, I've actually put in here what their side panel is. So they're made with smiles. Not sure how they certified that organically, but it's cute. But organic wheat flour is really the hero here. So what they did was they went with what is called a hero ingredient. They sourced all of their wheat organically. They made sure nothing else was from GMO sources, and they went with made with organic. And then something that doesn't say organic on the front, but you flip it over and you look at the side panel on the back and you see that there's a couple of organic ingredients in there. Those are products that are less than 70% organic, and or products where the production line that they were produced on was not certified organic. And so they weren't able to carry through the chain of custody under an organic audited system, and therefore can't make the claims on the front of pack that are covered by the USDA organic seal, et cetera. Moving on. From the consumer perspective, it's important to know that there are 3,000 plus substances that comprise everything added to food in the United States. Again, this is from the Organic Trade Association. There's only 67 non-agricultural minor ingredients that are allowed in organic processing. So there are certain things that happen at the production facility and in packaging, et cetera, that are not allowed in organic production and are part of the value of the organic purchase for consumers. If you want to see more about this, of course, the Organic Trade Association has more to offer. A snapshot of what that looks like at the organic farm is about the 900 plus synthetic active pesticide products that are registered with the EPA that are allowed to be used in conventional agricultural production versus the 27 synthetic active pest control products that are allowed in organic crop production. And these 27 have been heavily reviewed by a board that's called the National Organic Standards Board. The NOSB is who reviews the existing regulations and makes recommendations to the National Organic Program at the USDA for how organic programs should be regulated and transition by allowing or disallowing certain substances in order to keep the organic regulation whole. Similarly, in animal products, there are 550 synthetic active ingredients approved by the FDA for animal drugs. In organic, there are only 37 allowed. And again, they've been through that National Organic Standards Board review process, heavy scientific review with a lot of public commentary before being activated into the National Organic Standard. Who certifies organic? This is an overview of the organic certification process. As you've heard, what sets organic apart is that it is actual regulation that was codified into law in the early 1990s. Organic isn't just about what you do at the farm and the field. It's also how you harvest and segregate, how it's shipped, how it's processed, how it's labeled, and what retailers and brands are allowed to say about it. And at every single one of these steps, an accredited certifying agency has had to either be on site and or review documentation related to the claims made, related to the segregation of organic materials from other materials, in order to show there's a chain of custody that guarantees what the marketplace and the consumer is expecting from that item that has the USDA organic seal on it. If you want to find accredited certifying agents, here's the database you can go to see who is near you. So at some point in your 3-year transition process to organic, you'll need to work with a certifying body. You'll need to have an audit that occurs at your farm to show that your transition is matching what the National Organic Program outlines as on-field, on-farm practices that are related to that organic certification that has been passed on through the chain of custody to show that the entire thing has been certified. So this is the Organic Integrity Database that's managed by the United States Department of Agriculture. Quite easily within here, you can find a certifier that deals with your specific type of operation in your country, in your state, etc., and be able to see who you might want to work with that's in your neighborhood. Now, because it's relevant to the existing conversation only, we don't want to create any confusion between organic and regenerative agriculture, but we're quite aware that this is a topic of conversation at the moment. And so we thought we'd take a stab at helping you understand what you might be hearing in the buzz around regenerative agriculture versus organic agriculture. So again, organic regulations are what governs the USDA organic process and organic certification under the National Organic Program managed by the USDA. Under regenerative agriculture, it is not yet codified into law. There are no current regulations. The USDA does have a soil health definition that you can look up and read, but does not have a regenerative agriculture definition that you can look up and read. There are no federal regulations necessarily around on-pack claims or assertion made about regenerative agriculture. In many cases, the foundations of definitions of regenerative agriculture typically include cover crops, crop rotation, no and no-till, and animal or manure integration, although many regenerative agriculture definitions go beyond that to include things like social justice, things like perennial agriculture, etc. It is not the chain of custody review like you have with organic regulations, where there's already a marketplace and a premium that has been built in to pay producers for their organic products that they're offering. In fact, if you go in local grocery stores currently, there's less than a handful of regenerative agriculture products on shelf versus the organic products that are widely available and also have significant growth behind them. If you want to read more, I apologize that my logo seems to have moved there. repprovisions.com has a blog about what's the difference between organic and regenerative agriculture. So if you want to read further for your own understanding, I encourage you to take a look there. And now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jean Kelly to share more about what happens in the farm for transition. Steve, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, before we get to Jean, thank you very much, Tina. I liked what you said about consumers actually start to see the value of organic in terms of kind of flavor, nutrition, and ecology. So they're going beyond just, I don't want pesticides in my diet, to actually more nuanced reasons for preferring organic. Can you speak to that just a little bit? I think that's really interesting because the consumer is, as much as we want to see environmental change, it's got to be driven, and it is being driven by the consumer in terms of organic.
Yes, and I would say that what's lesser known about organic transition and organic purchases is that there's no BHT in cereal linings, there's no bisphenol A in soup can linings. There's a lot of additional value to the consumer in addition to the farm products that are being offered. So while they focus on what's happening at the farm, and most of us tend to think of agriculture being the big bucket of organic, it's also a lot in production, processing, and those other chemicals that consumers want to keep out of their diet, such as bisphenol A linings within soup cans. So thanks for letting me expound on that.
Yeah, very interesting. So that stuff is not allowed in organic products when you start processing and adding value, which I think is important for growers, producers to understand. Many who put added value into their products. Thank you for that. I'm going to let Gene, since he's got his slides up, Gene, if you would take it away. I hope you're with us. We can't hear you.
Steve, I can give him a buzz. I got his cell, just to kind of check in on him a sec.
No worries. I can. Okay.
There it is. I got it. Here we go. Sorry, guys. You got me?
It, Gene. We can
Okay,
hear you now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Apologies.
No worries.
Okay. Okay. You got the screen, right? We're all set. Apologies for that. Anyway, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Tina, for that introduction. I'm going to provide sort of an overview of some of the challenges and resources that are available for the transition, for people that are interested in transitions, people that are, again, curious about converting to organic production. And I think some sort of opportunities, I think, about organic production in a larger context. So I'll try to refer to that. I'll put some current literature out there too, so you guys can see what's there. All my resources will be available to you all once I'm done with this presentation. So I'll talk about a few things that are important in terms of resources for stakeholders in Colorado agriculture, and then I'll go sort of into the broader context of global change in organic agriculture. I'll talk a little bit about some of the key constraints that we look at in organic agriculture and some of the challenges. I'll share a little bit about the current science and understanding, and I refer to this as the ecological rules. Phil will appreciate that, about what things we know as scientists and what we think we know and what we need to be careful about. And then I'll sort of finish it up with some of the things that I think we should be concerned about in terms of the challenges, again, that are facing us in agriculture in general, but particularly with organic transitions. Just to plug briefly, one of the major resources that you have here in the Western Great Plains is the CSU Research Centers. We have scientific themes that involve climate smart agriculture, soil health, biological invasions, water management, community food programs. We call it climate smart energy as well, incorporating agrivoltaics and things into our research portfolio. And we refer to the statewide system as our Colorado Ag Observatory. You'll see there are 10 research centers around the state. They serve various aspects of agriculture. We do have a certified organic agricultural research center up near Hotchkiss, right outside of Paonia, up in that area, and it's 100% certified, mostly dealing with perennial crops. If you're interested, we have a field day on Friday, so come on out to Rogers Mesa and join the field day. Anyway, the newest addition to the CSU agricultural system is something called the Spur Campus. We have the Metro Ag Research Center, which is located in the Terra building. That's the one in the middle. The CSU Spur Campus is an outward-facing centered at the National Western Center down in Denver. So it's an ag center, but doing a much more, taking a greater look at the broader spectrum of agricultural challenges around the state of Colorado, and also particularly in urban systems and looking at food systems and alternative production systems, centered heavily on innovation and public engagement. So if you don't get a chance, if you do get a chance, you should go down. There are tours. It's open every second Saturday, the whole day, and they have demonstrations and such. I put the website links on there, and reach out to me if you'd like to get a personal tour. I'm more than happy to take you down there and show you what's going on. So let's start off with soils and soil processes. As I said earlier, I've looked at soil degradation pretty much across the entire planet, and we can do a simple comparison of what we refer to as undisturbed soils. Many of you might call them natural soils, and then anything that's domesticated would be from a cultural perspective. As Phil pointed out earlier, we understand that agriculture, we look at it as humanity's largest industry, and it's probably the largest. Well, it is the largest disturbance to happen to the planet biologically. However, it's been highly successful as populations grew and agriculture moved, but of course there are challenges as we start moving across the landscape. Many of them deal with the way that we treat our soil and the kinds of systems that we use to manage our soils. So when we look at undisturbed soils, we can look at the balance between nutrient inputs and outputs, utilization. We look at microbial activity. Of course, when we domesticate a system, it changes the system dramatically, increasing microbial respiration, increasing nutrient release and harvesting. And of course, the major thing that I've been working on in my career is the challenges of having soil erosion be a major process in soils. And many of the challenges that we have in water limited systems deal with minimizing the impacts of cultivation on soils, but also the challenges of controlling soil erosion, which has an enormous impact on not only the production aspects, but the environmental health aspect, as we see erosion playing a major part in things like air quality. And many of you have witnessed some of that throughout the Western Great Plains with some of the more recent sort of storms and activities that we've had as much as recently as this spring. But what we know is that organic agriculture and agricultural production has really become a major economic and cultural force. And what I'm going to talk about is really the context of organic agriculture and the larger sort of picture of things, looking at the opportunities and challenges. And that organic agriculture can become a really, really important part of what we're talking about, this regenerative movement in terms of restoring the health and vitality of our soils, our capacity to produce food for the planet, and also to increase well-being around the world. The first challenge we have is what I refer to as organic agriculture and the carbon conundrum. Many of you that are in agriculture understand now that there is a lot of emphasis on something referred to as carbon sequestration. Carbon has been studied for a very long time in terrestrial systems, and more recently there's been a focus on agricultural systems in terms of becoming not only being the problem, but the solution to this, what we call the carbon conundrum. So I thought I'd run through this quickly and just talk about, I think, where organic agriculture fits in this spectrum of the carbon story. This is a figure from Ratan Lal. It's been reproduced several times. And the easy story here is that if you look at the soils of the pedosphere, there's at least 2 to 3 times more carbon in those systems than there is in the atmosphere and in the biosphere. And what we know, or what we think we know, is we know that food systems are responsible, currently conventional systems, for 34% of the global emissions of greenhouse gases. And that's the entire supply chain. Agricultural production itself is around 20 to 21%. That's about 3.5 petagrams a year. What we also know from the literature, and what becomes really important, is when you start looking at this concept of sequestration, what they call the sequestration potential, it's highly variable, and it ranges from 0.2 to 0.5 petagrams per year. So what you see is that the sequestration rate is actually very, very slow. So in our soils in the Western Great Plains, for example, once we go into a cultured system, in a conventional system, we tend to lose 40 to 50% of the carbon over the first 5 years of cultivation, regardless of the treatment, even in a minimum till system. However, when you look at the sequestration, it takes at least 15 to 20 years to put that level of carbon back. So we generally lose a lot more carbon, right? But we lose it faster and we gain it slower, right? And that's a big challenge when you start talking about using soils or ecosystems to sequester or offset carbon. That becomes sort of the narrative of the story. What we understand about organic agriculture and its contribution is that it's really context-based. And so organic agriculture has lots of different looks, and that varies globally. And I'll show you some stuff that's related to that. But organic agriculture does have a role in sort of regenerating soils and sustainability. But we need to be careful about this carbon conundrum, or the trap of just focusing just on carbon. As Phil pointed out earlier, one of the major things is we have so many other ecosystem services that soils provide. not only putting carbon into the soil, but also enhancing biodiversity, enhancing water quality, protecting our air quality as well. So those are things that we really need to maybe focus a bit more on. And I think organic agriculture gives us that opportunity to take the focus away from just carbon. What we understand is organic farms only occupy a small fraction of the cropland globally. So when you start talking about expansion for carbon inputs, that becomes sort of a challenge. And we need to make sure that the science is out in front of that rather than just saying that organic agriculture is going to reverse climate change. The other thing that really becomes sort of interesting, and I think that we need to be aware of as agriculturalists, is that the agricultural sector needs to be carbon neutral before we start talking about sequestering carbon. And that means that we need to reduce our use of fossil fuels, and that's with fertilizer amendments and also driving our tractors and tilling the ground. Organic agriculture fits perfectly into this because we're reducing the inputs of synthetic fertilizers, and again, trying to reduce our inputs of fossil fuels into those systems as well. The statement I like the best is that when we're looking at a scientific perspective of the carbon conundrum, and again, I'll talk to Phil because I saw him referenced in a recent article, we really need to avoid the moral hazard for policymakers, and that fossil fuels are not tolerable, and that organic sector will not mitigate them. So it's just a part of that. So actually, what I'm proposing is that we need to look at the soil more broadly and the systems more broadly, and not focus just on carbon. Now, globally, there's some stuff that's been done recently, and this is really sort of where we look at organic agriculture in context. If you look at a scenario of 100% conversion of organic agriculture, and this is what they call the normative scenario. The normative scenario means that you're not incorporating animal agriculture or bringing animal products in from other sites. What you generally would see is you'd see a decline in global carbon. Optimal organic would lead to a small increase. You can see that's the blue line, right? And the optimal would be that if you could import and incorporate animal agriculture from other sites. The normative over a 100-year period would generally lose about 9, 13, 18% of the carbon stock over 20, 50, 100 years respectively. Again, optimal transition would be incorporating animal agriculture into our systems. And that could be by shipping in manure or actually providing grazing inputs to control and cover crops and things like that. The other aspect of agriculture that we have to focus on, and particularly organic agriculture, and I think is somewhat understudied, is this idea of soil moisture. In water-limited systems, we argue that water is actually almost more important than the amount of carbon that you're putting in systems, since it's linked directly to the other ecosystem services that are provided by soils and soil resources. Here's a brief summary of those of you that are not big on soil moisture. This is what I've been spending the last 15 years of my career studying. So I'll give you some little tidbits about the importance of soil moisture. We know that non-ag systems consume about 3/4 of what we call the global green water flow. And that's the green water is the water that moves through the soil and out through transpiration. The remaining 1/4 goes between croplands and pasture lands. So you see a lot of our water is tied up in natural ecosystems. But the green water accounts for 65% of the global flow of fresh water, and that's for green or blue water. Organic systems require trade-offs in water, right? In water-limited systems with regard to tillage and cover crops. Both of these impact water content and water quality. So organic agriculture needs to expand its perspective and make sure that we're looking at the savings we can find in water and water quality with regard to organic agricultural systems. What we know that tillage, for example, decreases water content in water-limited systems. And I think the estimate we have in Colorado is that for each plow, you lose about 1/2 inch of soil water. What really is interesting on a global perspective is that the green water, or all the water in soils, approximately matches all the rivers flowing into the oceans. And what this highlights is the importance of soil globally, but also the importance of soil as being one of the largest reservoirs of water on the planet as well. Now, one of the things that we've been proposing in the Western Great Plains is something we refer to as the strategic utilization of soils. And as you remember earlier, I talked about something referring to the use of organic agriculture as context-based. So I use this as an example, and this is what we work with growers on, is that what we know there's an enormous amount of variability in what we call the biologically available water in soils, and that soils have an enormous amount of variability in their ability to hold water. So the figure to the left is Horsetail Creek. This is out in northeastern Colorado. It's a series of soils and grasslands, and we did some intensive studies on the capacity to store water. We refer to that as biologically available water. We broke the soils into 3 different categories: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And what you note from the figure is that the phase 2 soils have the highest capacity to store water. Phase 1 and phase 3 actually have very low capacity to store water. And what we argue is that when you're transitioning any system, you really need to have a full knowledge of the soils that you're working with the inherent properties of the soils, and more specifically in water-limited systems, the water holding capacity and the capacity of the soil to retain water. So if you can monitor the water, you can monitor your practices, and you can benefit your production system and create greater resilience in the agricultural system. So we focused a lot on water. Again, strategic utilization of soils, using the best soils for the right management. So into the literature we can look, and the two things that really affect production of organic systems, or some of the many challenges, deal with things like controlling weeds and tillage or no tillage. And so in the Western Great Plains, we sort of not kid around, but we know that organic systems or organic production systems in water-limited systems, very rarely do you find no-till systems in those areas because of the weed problem. Tilled organic systems in dry lands basically are used for weed control, cover crop termination, and for our work in seedbed preparation. In many cases, what we've tried to promote is the utilization of grazed systems and incorporating animals into the agricultural system. One of the key variables that we look at in terms of controlling weeds would be the use of cover crops to control weeds. And I summarize all these in a table at the end. I won't go through that table in detail, but that'll be available to all of you. In many of the studies I looked at in the Western Great Plains or in water-limited systems, there were no water measurements. So I sit here to tell you how important water is, and I think many of our colleagues are overlooking an important variable that they could be studying. In this particular research example, you can see the differences between conventional and a grazed organic system and a tilled organic system. The one thing that you'll notice from the bottom, you can see the weed biomass. So the weed biomass is highest in the grazed system, and that's probably one of the major things that's limiting the production that you see in the upper panel here. Again, in this particular study, no water measurements. Finally, what I did was I pulled together from the literature, I created this table. It looked a lot better when I was making it 2 days ago, but it provides sort of an overview of the types of things we need to worry about and what we worry about in the Western Great Plains, particularly when we look at conventional systems that are tilled and not tilled, organic systems that are tilled and not tilled. And so this is kind of the research portfolio that we carry out at much of the research centers. We do research on weed control using tillage. Of course, in the conventional systems with no-till, there's probably a large increase in herbicide use. Organic, we can use tillage and also cover crops to control weeds. With nutrient additions, obviously conventional and systems are using synthetic fertilizers. With many of the problems we have in agriculture now, I talked earlier about the inputs or the losses of CO2 from agriculture. One of the big things that we're finding out is that the footprint of agriculture, or the more important footprint of agriculture and conventional agriculture, is actually the production of methane and nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a direct result of nitrogen fertilizer additions to soil. So by switching over to an organic system, potentially reducing the nitrous oxide emissions. We have weed control, both in conventional and non-conventional systems. And then, of course, looking at the overall nutrient availability, looking at conventional versus organic. In many of the organic systems and water-limited systems, we need to have off-site input. So that might be incorporating manure from a neighbor or someplace down the road. But those sorts of things present some of the challenges that we're seeing now. Cover crops provide a really great opportunity for nutrient inputs. And many of the things that we've been working on lately are looking at the integration of animals, for example, sheep and goats, in grazing down some of the cover crops. Again, all the way to the right, the water availability to me seems to be the most interesting or most important aspect of conversion from conventional to organic. Again, particularly in dry land systems, the soil health is directly related to the capacity of the soil to increase the water availability and store water. Finally, I'll finish up with just a couple of comments. And again, all these materials will be available to you. Climate change is really raising havoc in agriculture, particularly warmer nights and reduced frost account for almost 1/5 of the rise in pest and disease occurrence globally. We need new strategies for organic farmers, looking at reducing tillage intensity and frequency. Again, by plow, we lose about ½ inch of soil with each plow. This should be evaluated further in the context of greenhouse gas emissions and the savings for methane and nitrous oxide. Eliminating tillage in limited environments is really a challenge, and there's more research needed to generate new tactics for integrating livestock into these systems. There are concerns with organic agriculture, with yield conductions and a lack of effective pest control and nutrient management options and soil erosion. Tillage becomes, again, a major challenge. And then finally, what we think in terms of the overall spectrum of organic agriculture and its context in the agricultural system is that really having organic agriculture at scale creates diversity in our landscapes and our communities. So the idea of transitioning to agriculture or organic agriculture is actually a smart move, because it creates more diversity in the overall landscape of your region. And then finally, one of the things that I'm going to just sort of make a shout out for is that much of the soils data we're using now is out of date. The soil surveys were published over 20 or 30 years ago, yet they provide the basis for many of the projections. I argue, again, strategic utilization of soils might be a key parameter to include when you're transitioning to organic ag. And here's my contact information, and I will yield the floor to my colleague, Phil Taylor.
Awesome. Thank you, Gene.
Phil, I'm going to let you go. I had some questions that Gene brought up for me, but let's have your discussion and we can talk at the end.
Okay, great. All righty. All right. I recognize, as I was kind of in between speakers, I might have too many slides, so I'm going to kind of rock and roll, and hopefully we can pick up some stuff in the Q&A. The mission of Madag is to create a regenerative revolution in agriculture. We favor revolution over reform. We think that change comes from the margins ultimately, and so that's where we spend our time and energy. We were inspired by this gentleman, the great American sort of agrarian saint, Wendell Berry. If you are not familiar with Wendell Berry, he wrote a series of wonderful poems called the Mad Farmer Poems back in the late 70s that inspired this organization. And among many fascinating writings and quotes that he has, I love this one: eating is an agricultural act, and how we eat determines to a large extent how the world is used. And as Gene and I were both alluding to, agriculture and the way that is the predominant way in which we have used the earth and extracted those natural resources to build civilization. And for me, if we're going to reimagine that relationship between, people and the planet, agriculture is that nexus point. It's where really the health of ourselves and the health of the planet is defined. As I said, for us, creating a revolution really is about, oh, you feel your screen is showing, just loading Google Slides. Thank you, Tina. 1 second, everybody. Before I start going crazy with talking, I'll be sure my slides are actually working.
There you go.
We can see them now.
Cool. I'm just going to leave it like that rather than slide showing it, because it'll probably bounce me to some other screen and all that stuff. So here's a shot of Wendell Berry. Thanks, Tina, for that flag. What we like to think of our work as being is really shifting from this old story to the new story. There's many different ways to think about this and talk about it. But over the last, 10,000 years and maybe more, I think the development of civilization, especially the Western approach to building economy, has really been predominated by the concepts, the themes, the language on the left-hand side of this screen. The things that guide our financial economy, the way that we create a more transactional existence versus a relational existence, is dominated by a lot of the stuff that you see on the left-hand side. And the work at Madag is really about shifting that pendulum back. These are neither rights or wrongs, good nor bads. It's that we've shifted so heavily left into this quantitative, competitive, extractive, linear, centralized monoculture way of doing things that we need to bring back these counterbalancing forces that focus on quality, building whole and true wealth, cooperation, a sense of intergenerational commitment, responsibility, decentralizing power, focusing on diversity over monoculture. The list can go on and on and on. And so as we think about reimagining the human enterprise, this is a lot of the orienting principles and concepts that we are often working with as we design the way that we serve both the farmer and the land. At Madag, our real effort is to help stewards transition and thrive in regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of philosophical underpinning to this, but practically day in, day out, what we're doing is showing up as much as we can on the ground to help stewards of the earth transition and thrive in regenerative ag. This very simple way gives us a lot of focus to what we're doing. It's one reason why we don't do a lot of work in like Farm Bill. There are other people doing work in Farm Bill and policy. There are reasons why we aren't doing other things, and it's because we are so focused on working with the stewards as the agents of change. All of our work really, again, centers on the farm. The farm is really where land and business intersect, and it defines that relationship to the earth in a very practical way. What we choose to do in the field, what we choose to do in an ecosystem are the things that either build or take away soil health, build soil or have its loss, create nutrient-dense food or not nutrient-dense food. All of the great things that we're actually challenged with happen foremost at the level of the farm. And so a lot of the way that we look at this is if we're going to help a farm and a farm family transition to regenerative organic, there are what we have identified as kind of three core barriers to making that transition. The first is what we think of as land and business strategy, thinking about the ecological and the financial well-being of the farm simultaneously. And so we have a team largely located within the nonprofit that really focuses on how to help farmers improve that ecological and financial side of the farm enterprise. What we learned over the last few years is that it's all well and good to do land and business strategy and think about, that kind of farm vision, whether it be cover cropping to farm succession. We can think about all of that, but if you don't have money, it's very difficult to move from idea into action. And for better or worse, money is often the primary decision-making factor when deciding whether to make a change or not. And we can, disentangle capitalism and all that stuff at a different point, but practically, it is the thing that needs to be thought about. And the way that money comes into a farm is through two means. Where is the farm getting their financing? Who's supporting them from a working capital, real estate, and equipment perspective? Who is providing them capital and financing? And then where are they selling their products to? Capital is, we view like the catalyst of change, and then markets provide that long-term sustainability of revenues back into the farm. And so MAD has become a family of organizations where we have a nonprofit that really centers on the land and business strategy and the storytelling. And then we have, over the last few years, actively spun out a public benefit corp called MAD Capital that is financing the transition to organic. And we are actively spinning out MAD Markets, which connects farmers to buyers and buyers to farmers, so that we can holistically address what we feel like are the main barriers to transformation. And I'll just quickly reflect on these different kind of strategies so you get a sense for how we're thinking about them. So first, within the nonprofit, our MAD Lands team is really the team focused on land and business strategy. These are just a couple case studies. We've worked with dozens and dozens of farmers across the country, where a lot of where we start is really what is the vision and the appetite of that farmer and that farm family to make a change. Oftentimes in this way of working, it gets reduced to simple terms like technical assistance or financial assistance. And in reality, farm families are motivated by much deeper virtues and ties. And one, I think, of the sort of secret ingredients of the MAD way is really building relationships with our farmers as if they are family. So we are the first people that they call. We can be thought partners. We can connect them to new people. We can help facilitate their own transition by activating certain practices. So, like the DeGroot Dairy here in Colorado, they sold all of their Holsteins and then moved to an A2, heritage-based grass-fed operation that supports origin milk. And we helped them design their grazing plan. They had actually, when we started working with them, never grazed a cow on the land. It had all been in a confined operation. And so we can kind of go soup to nuts on helping farmers make transitions. Part of Madlands is also, part of what we're doing here is a very proud partner of the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, the TOPP program that the USDA is developing. And this program is like totally in our sweet spot. It's a perfect partnership. We do a lot of this work. And so we're partnering with the USDA in a variety of ways. But in the TOPP program, we are actively fulfilling some of the USDA's goals, like connecting farmers to mentors, basically building mentorship networks, providing community building opportunities like field days, all sorts of things. And so we're extremely excited about the USDA's investment in organic transition and are proud to be a partner and can talk more about this as needed. The other thing that we do within our Madlands team is we have a strong focus on understanding really the impact and the benefit of transition. So we do that through storytelling and qualitative work through our Mad Media team. We are also doing that with very rigorous science. I share a history as an academic and a biogeochemist like Gene. I spent 15 years studying soils and ecosystems. And so this is sort of my wheelhouse, historically anyway, where on select farms where we're financing their transition, we're actually measuring sort of the whole farm transition from butterflies to balance sheets. We're looking at their financial health from a balance sheet and a P&L perspective. We're also looking at how bird biodiversity, plants, insects, soil health, and even the quality of the food is transitioning and transforming on that farm. So this is an exciting research project or research approach that I think is going to yield some pretty important data for the movement as it continues to grow. So bouncing over to capital, so we have kind of our land and business strategy. Mad Capital is really an alternative financier for farmers. It's an alternative bank. We're not officially a bank, but we act and operate a lot like a bank. And so what we're able to do is offer really flexible financing solutions to farmers that are really tuned to the business model and the cash flow of the farm. And traditional banks just don't do that. Traditional banks want full principal and interest at the end of the year. They really think of organic farmers as outsiders. Regenerative practices really haven't hit the mainstream yet. They're perceived more as a risk than a benefit. And so because of our deep intelligence and committedness to regenerative organic ag, we're able to effectively underwrite these loans and support farmers, not as someone that is holding power above, but really as partners in a shared movement together. We've been around a couple years now, and we're making a ton of impact. We do things in operating lines, real estate, equipment, and then infrastructure. Those are kind of our 4 categories of lending. And so right now we have a little over 45,000 acres under management that we're lending into. We currently have over 8,000 acres transitioning to organic. All of these acres have regenerative practices on them. There's covenants in our loan docs that the farmers are practicing. We currently have 17 million under management. And because of our loans, our farmers are more financially healthy. We, over the last 2 years, have a documented increase of 120% increase in farm revenue after our lending is injecting into the farm and replacing their somewhat stagnant and old borrowing base or lending base, sorry. A lot of what we do in Mad Capital is this. We basically bridge the messy middle in farm lending. Out in the world, there are a lot of investors. There's high net worth individuals. There's family offices that really want to allocate capital to regenerative organic farmers. And on the other side of the marketplace, there are farmers that are seeking finance, but these investors and farmers really have no idea how to interact. An investor might live in downtown Manhattan and be passionate about regenerative ag, but they have no idea how to lend or reach out to a farmer in the middle of Iowa that wants to transition. And so what Mad Capital does is we really bridge that by creating excellent underwriting, servicing, sales, relationship management, portfolio management. We, manage all of that stuff in a very streamlined way so that it works very well on behalf of the investor and the farmer. And by bridging this messy middle, we're able to get a lot of work done. The last thing I'll focus on is just our Mad Markets program. Again, where a farmer sells their crops and livestock is how they make money. And when they make money, they're able to invest in the land more and build their business. And so where we are with Mad Markets is basically a goal to become the go-to supplier of regenerative and organic ingredients, for brands, restaurants, retailers, and institutional buyers. As Tina was talking about, there's a huge gap between the farm field and the shelf. And because of that difficulty in building resilient supply chains, there really isn't a market solution out there right now that can connect the dots between farmers and those buyers. There are a variety of bespoke programs that brands spend a lot of time, money, energy, and passion on. However, a lot of those bespoke programs are not very scalable for others in the industry. So it's what we think of as a huge opportunity to kind of close that gap. In Tina's presentation, here's another kind of way of looking at it. If we look at the growth drivers behind consumer demand right now, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen that the organic label is one of the fastest growing labels in basically store expansion. Whether you go to Costco or Whole Foods, the organic industry is growing at an 8 to 10% CAGR year on year. It's been doing that for a couple decades. The other really, really important growth driver, which is just like kind of Pluto on the map here, is regenerative ag. So, as Tina again mentioned, the definition is still sort of being sussed out, and there's a lot of different opinions. Regardless of all of that kind of noise, we're seeing regenerative ag find a lot of purchase within the marketplace. So when you intersect regenerative ag and organic, I think this becomes a really powerful driver of consumer demand that the markets can penetrate, which is exciting. Our approach to this is really about closing the gap between grower and buyer by vertically integrating. We want to close that gap by owning and operating the guts of the supply chain, and we are starting by acquiring Timeless Foods. This acquisition will be done within the next month. And if you don't know Timeless, founded by David Owens, is a legendary organic garbanzo and lentil company, subject of the book Lentil Underground. And we are absolutely exhilarated and honored to even be considered in the acquisition of this company. And this will be our first foray. This will be our first foray into this vertically integrated strategy of closing the gap between grower and buyer. Just to wrap up, we're working in all of these states, coast to coast, and having a lot of fun. Another comment that I'll just leave is that, we don't do this alone. We have hundreds of partners. And what I think is critical in this is that no one is going to do this alone. This is really about creating a community of change. This is just a smattering of our partners. Part of the fun, I think, is being in relationship with like-minded people, whether they're buyers, whether they're investors, whether they're donors, whether they're other nonprofits, for-profits. The potentiality to weave and create something much bigger is, I think, going to be critical for the emergence of this movement. And so we are fully embracing cooperation as a way of creating change. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is, I just shared like all these different things we're doing, but we really center it around what we think of as a flywheel of change. If you haven't read Jim Collins' monograph on flywheels, which are basically virtuous cycles that self-perpetuate, I highly encourage you reading it, because I think that any organization needs to be anchored in what is a positive feedback of system change. And so how we think about all of this stuff harmonizing is really 4 simple ways. At Madag, we discover and support aspirational regenerative farmers. That is the phase gate criteria where we are really, really focused on serving stewards. The second thing is we help them create exemplary farms by bringing capital markets, knowledge, and community to catalyze ideas into action. So those are the 4 main barriers that we've identified through thousands of conversations across the country. Once those farms are humming and improving, we understand the benefits of that transformation through qualitative and quantitative methods. We find ways to reward that transition, and we share those stories. Those stories, then, we can leverage as success to attract others and build the movement. As you build the movement, you have more farmers joining in, and so the flywheel goes and goes and goes and builds. And so, this is just one, I think, mental, emotional, psycho-spiritual framework that, sort of anchors our team as we find ourselves working in all of the kind of nooks and crannies of the movement. So just kind of some food for thought to leave people with. And with that, I will end.
Phil, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. You certainly brought up a lot of thoughts for me. All our panelists have, and we've got a nice group of attendees listening in. So folks, post your questions for us if you like. I have a few for myself to get us going, and then the chat room should be open to everyone. So again, please feel free to ask questions of our panelists. What I was interested in that you mentioned is this flywheel, Phil. I really like that positive loop feedback. But for farmers getting into transition, what do you find is like the biggest challenge you're seeing, let's just say even this year, for farmers that are looking to kind of get on that positive carousel, but may be hesitant or see some challenges? And what I also like that you mentioned was the capital, money, financing is so very important. As a matter of fact, it's going to be a focus of our next webinar on September 28th. So we'd like to dive in a little more on Mad Capital and what they're doing if you're open. And we certainly want to focus on where's the money to help farmers in transition, even the cost of certification. But, go back to, please, what do you find the biggest, you're out there in the field, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges that farmers are telling you about to make this big step?
Yeah, you're not going to like this answer, but the answer is it depends. Every farm is different. You could drive from here to Pennsylvania, and it's very tempting to think that farms look the same. But once you lift the hood of that farm, you find an entirely unique array of barriers. It might be like Papaw, having veto power around the transition. Until he dies, nothing's happening. Another one might simply be it's a young farmer taking over intergenerationally. They don't have enough equity in their balance sheet to get a loan from a traditional banker, so they're capital limited. Other farmers that are actually really well defined and looking to expand, they might just be nervous about organic markets. Like, who do I sell to? So, part of the approach that we have, again, is that kind of holism where we can meet a farmer where they are. And we have a kind of a mantra that like an inch is a cinch, a yard is hard. And so rather than, coming in and trying to change all those things at once, we look for the highest and greatest barrier and then try to help get over that. And then that creates a virtuous feedback within that farm and farm family that encourages further commitment. So that's kind of how it works.
Thank you very much. Now, Tina, you also have worked with, you also brought up, Phil, and I want to tie this in. We need those large food brands to encourage farmers, like to create the demand, to create the market for organic crops, organic commodities, organic ingredients. And Tina, you actually have done that. You've worked with some, world-sized brands and have driven thousands of acres in transition. What was the biggest obstacle getting these farmers to, again, make that leap?
Yeah, it's going to be a dissatisfying answer from a farmer perspective. It's actually the middle processing. And so it's what Phil was talking about with timeless seeds when he mentioned it late in his presentation about that middle. Where do I actually take my organic product once I've grown it in order for it to be processed at scale? And so it's the minimum order quantities, it's the production line certification, and it's the price point and efficiency within production facilities. So every production facility has an overhead that they're managing to. And if they're not able to bolt on organic products because of the internal storage or the production line clean time, et cetera, it can be a barrier to that product actually making it to consumers. The way that I was able to help in a massive project with on-farm conversion was through a certification called Certified Transitional, which actually took that 3-year transition process that farms are required to go through from the National Organic Program, segregate those materials, put them in a box with a certification that we did in partnership with QAI, and allow consumers to make the choice to help with on-farm conversion. And that was with Kashi. So what we did is we ended up transitioning over 10,000 acres on my watch, and then it continued to transition after I left in 2018. But what we were able to do is return $2.5 million in profitability to farmers during that time of transition, in which normally their transition product would have gone to conventional markets. Now, what's changed since that time is the USDA and policy payments for on-farm transition for things like certification charges, audit charges, and the capital markets, like what Phil mentioned about MAD markets, is that there's now a bunch of mechanisms in place that didn't exist even over 5 years ago to help farms transition and or get paid and reimbursed for the charges that it takes to transition to organic certification. That said, we're still at the 1% threshold of acres in the US of organic acreage that are certified in production, and that matters. Maureen Dube-Savage had put in the question how we actually shift ag stakeholders to current products. The answer is consumer demand. So, large manufacturers might gobble up organic brands and then remove the USDA organic standard from those products because the brand recognition is there, and they think consumers won't notice when they remove the USDA organic logo. The strongest way to hold their feet to the fire and to continue to grow organic demand in those large company chains is actually for consumers to do the work with their dollars and to show that the drive is there with the organic logo, and that when the organic logo is removed, that the demand goes down. And unfortunately, that's one of the biggest, or the only big, large lever we have within the marketplace, is actually to show them that if they take that away, that then consumption goes down and their own bottom line is at stake. So I want to make sure Maureen's question got answered in the context of what you just asked, Dave, but hopefully I just threaded all of those together in a way that makes sense for the producers that are on the call. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. I mean, what's going to drive that from, 1%, I mean, it can only go up from there, right? But what's going to drive that is this kind of demand. When I see organic Doritos in my King Super, that's going to help drive markets for farmers. But I think a topic is ways to find those markets in terms of helping. I think that's always the first step, is what is your market for what you're going to grow? And it certainly is important in organic. Jean, I would like to turn to you because even in our conversations leading up to this and what you brought up today, a lot of thoughts for me, actually. First, our region is Colorado and the Plains states. So certainly we are in a water limited system, water compromised regions. And it struck me that we hear a lot about cover crops in terms of keeping the soil in place, rebuilding organic matter into the soil. And yet it seems that it comes at a cost of some water. Obviously, that makes sense. You need water for that cover crop to grow. But again, it's interesting, a soil scientist focusing on water. It actually does make sense because that's our biggest challenge here in the Plains states for organic transition. What are your thoughts in this regard? You're on mute.
Trying to knock out the background noise. I'm sorry. There are two. I think, on the margins of the Western Great Plains, the water limitation and going from dry land farming and transitioning to an organic system. I think just having that knowledge base, that water becomes sort of the key variable there, right? It's the master variable for everything. And so if between your weed control for organic, you know, how are you going to do that, right? And it's mostly going to be through some sort of, you know, a tillage operation. But what I think is what's becoming more evident around, you know, in a place like Colorado, where we're basically a cattle state. I mean, we're right up there, and that I think integrating livestock into the landscape is really one of the things that we've been exploring. So at our research centers now, we never had we had livestock at only 2 of them. Now we have goats and sheep at different ones to help us with sort of figuring out how do we incorporate the cover crops? How do we get the nutrients from the cover crops back into the soil? And we're finding that grazing seems like something we could work with, right? And it's not a huge investment for some growers to have, you know, smaller livestock in. Obviously, beef cattle is a little bit of a different story. But I think that you know, there is that trade-off. Because I was one of the people that said, oh, no way you're going to have cover crops. It won't ever work in Colorado. But I was wrong. So it is working, but it's really selective, and it's sort of context-based. It depends on what kind of a landscape you're in, the history of the land, how degraded the soil is. But we've been looking at different types of cover crops that can be monetized, you know, for livestock, you know, so looking at different types of forages that we can be using. And we've started going more, you know, I have to say, years ago, I was out with Wes Jackson at the Land Institute. We're getting really good results with Kernza, you know, with some of our research centers. Some perennial crops are actually working out pretty well, you know. So you know, our whole thing is keeping the ground covered. And, you know, the challenges with organic is that if you have a weed problem, which is becoming a bigger problem all over the state, not just in organic, but the whole entire state, we're just inundated with weeds, particularly with how wet it was this year. It's usually tillage or herbicides, and you know, we're trying to sort of, you know, try to strike that balance to see what works for our growers. I think with the organic transition, the key thing with our guys is, you know, we have to provide them with a safety net. We got to make the barriers lower to get into the game, and then also provide a safety net. So if people take that step, which I think is a good step, we just have to make sure that we have a way to sort of backstop them on that. And we find that with everything from equipment to, you know, to inputs and things as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gene. Hey, we have a question from Ben Fenton, who actually backs and helps grow a lot of organic brands. And he wants to hear a little bit more on certifications. And, you know, we do have what I think is unique about USDA certified organic. It is under federal law a program that audits from seed to shelf how that product is grown and produced. You mentioned we don't see that quite yet for regenerative, although there is a certification program out there, Regenerative Organic Certified, the Regenerative Organic Alliance. But again, I want to make it clear that we are here encouraging farmers to transition to a system that USDA supports in organic, and to be regenerative curious, because I think those are the next steps. But Tina, would you speak a little bit? And you also put up this organic integrity database. So how would a farmer select a certifier to work with? And speak to this certification perspective a bit, if you will.
Yes, well, there's 2 different questions there, Steve. So on organic certification, it would be working with an accredited certifier that the National Organic Program at the USDA has authorized to do an audit at your farm in order for you to achieve your organic certification. For the Regenerative Organic Certification, ROC, led by the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is the Rodale Institute, Dr. Bronner's in Patagonia, was co-created as a bolt-on to the organic certification. So I want to be very clear about this. You'd have to transition into organic and then want to go organic plus if you wanted to be ROC certified. So it requires the National Organic Program certification at its base. Now, what it does that goes beyond the organic standard is it includes some things that consumers have thought was inherent within the organic standard, but has not necessarily been part of what the standard has meant until now. And that is, it has an additional animal welfare audit component. It has a social and fair pay justice audit, and it goes further on soil health metrics. So you have to have organic certification, and you have to pass 3 other audits that include animal welfare, fair pay, and soil health in order to get that full ROC certification. Now, what role does this play? It plays the North Star role. So what they're doing is showing if you want to go even further beyond what the USDA has authorized as organic production, that there are additional components that you could layer into your farm and be able to charge a premium to them. And currently, there's data actually showing that there's a significant increase on ROC certified products versus non-GMO project verified and organic and conventional products, obviously. And so for producers that are just now, that are already organic certified and want to go beyond that, there's still a significant premium they can command in the marketplace. And there's, kind of a separate conversation to be had about that, since we're looking at the base organic NOP certification here today. So I'll kick it back to you so we can move on.
Well, I just had my first regenerative ice cream. It was matcha chocolate chip. It was fantastic. With A2 milk, by the way, which leads me to Gene. You mentioned about your discovering a role that livestock can play in an organic system, which kind of goes back a little bit to what Rudolf Steiner was envisioning with biodynamic. And then I know that's one question, but then also, and maybe Phil, the next one is for you, but the Kernza and other alternative or perennial crops are of interest to me. So speak to the livestock question first, please.
I think the livestock question is, again, scale dependent. Like we've sort of in these systems, if you go back to what Phil was talking about earlier in terms of the evolution of agriculture, these systems have a history of grazing. I mean, grazing is a part of these landscapes, in the Western Great Plains. And so this idea of, in bringing animals back into the sort of the agricultural system, the land system, and return them to land, take them out of feedlots, it really does enhance nutrient cycling. It also helps us reduce the cover crops rather than having to plow them in, right? Those sorts of things. So those are just sort of alternative ways to do, integrate livestock. But it seems to me in this sort of a system where we have so much livestock activity that we have to figure out a way to get them more incorporated. Particularly when you looked at those estimates, we talked about I think the optimum sort of situation was with livestock on the landscape, right? So that's a big different than what we saw. And there was actually more potential for returning nutrients to soil with livestock. So I think livestock, that's a real opportunity, I think, for people that are just getting into this arena. And that's one thing. And then what was the other part of the question? I forgot.
Well, I want to, you remind me of, I actually attended a field day on a bison ranch with Alan Savory.
Yeah.
And if anybody really wants to take the whole livestock theory, further, learn about mob grazing and how that actually can help restore brittle lands of the West. And that's the Savory Institute. But I think I'm going to turn it to Phil to talk a little bit about, I've heard now a bit about Kernza. It's come up a half a dozen times. Why are we talking about perennial crops and Kernza? And again, some of the names that are coming up here are Wes Jackson, Wendell Berry, certainly, founders of this school of thought.
Many ways to get into that one. I would say that, if we aspire agriculture to mimic nature and we look at nature, there are very few systems that are resilient and durable that are annual based systems. We find annual based systems very rare. And the holy grail of agriculture is to mimic nature by developing perennial systems. And we are on a 10,000-year journey to figure that out. And I would say it's just beginning. And Kernza is one of the first stepping stones that holds some promise. First sort of developed at Rodale, and then over the last 3 decades, the Land Institute with Wes Jackson and Tim Cruz and Lita Hahn, they're really charging forward on reimagining staple crops by perennializing them. So if you imagine, every year when you plant wheat, you have to do a primary disturbance of that ecosystem. You reset the whole thing through tillage or whatever. And the idea of a perennial crop is that you plant it and then you can harvest it for years to come without disturbing the soil and without ruining, the fungal networks and the bacterial communities. And so jump in, Gene.
Yeah, we're on our 3rd year of Kernza over in Southwest Colorado, which is a completely water limited system, dry land. And it's actually the stands are looking really well. And I agree with Phil. Anything we can do to cover ground for a period of time is really going to benefit the system. And I think, the perennial cropping systems can be incorporated into an overarching sort of a larger scale. And I keep using the word regenerative. I get the whole. I've been around a long time. I mean, back in the old days with Rodale, we used to call organic was the code for regenerative. But the regenerative thing, I think, has sort of got some traction in that it's about thinking a bit more broadly. I think organic is a critical part of it, but it's really looking at innovation. There are different ways of regenerating our systems that have been just degraded. And so we're going to need a little bit more creativity to do this rather than, we're not going back, we're going forward, right? So there are some things that we can look over our shoulder and say, well, that worked really well. But in order to implement them with the planet changing so quickly, we need to think of different ways of doing it in more creative ways. And so I think there's a lot of things we can be doing in terms of innovative and a bit technology would help us as well. But anyway, so know that we're really, I've become a big, when Wes introduced the perennials to me about 25 years ago, I didn't get it, but we've been starting to use them and they actually are helping us in some really degraded systems. So keeping the ground covered.
And this is where brands can help create markets for, because it's going to take some consumer education to learn about Kernza, but 20 years ago, nobody knew about quinoa, and where is that today? So, or kiwi fruit. So it can happen. And this is where I think, partnerships with market partners can really help. We are approaching the end of our 90-minute segment of our first webinar. I want to give each person, just give me like about a 20-second closing thought if you have it. If not, pass it along, and then I'm going to wrap up here. So just a very quick kind of lightning round. Phil, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just say, riffing on Gene, Patagonia Provisions has done an awesome job supporting the commercialization of Kernza. They've now brought on like 15 brewery partners that have really skyrocketed the demand beyond what was previously happening. And that approach of a small inclusion into a staple product basically strikes that balance of creating demand while not breaking the bank book. And so I just want to riff on Gene's comment there that, all of your comments, that the market has a lot of power, and figuring out how to do that is going to be kind of critical to this whole movement.
Kernza needs good PR. Tina, any closing thoughts from you, please?
Yeah, I'll just build on that about the market. The organic sector has the most clearly defined premium for production systems within the U.S. And so if you're after the economics and you have both clarity on what you want to grow and who you can sell it to, the economics are there. It's sustained by the consumer to help you in that transition, along with additional policy and support from USDA.
Thank you so much. Gene, final comment from you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we all can agree on this is that as agriculturalists, scientists, stakeholders, we need to tell our story. We need to control the narrative on this. We know that this is a system that is important to the planet, sustaining the planet, and we know that we can sort of make this work. And so, I think storytelling becomes an important of it, but it has to be based on sound science. And so I think what we want to do is make sure we rely on our scientists and really try to make sure that what we do on the land is beneficial for not only the land, but also our stakeholders as well. So I'm, with all the challenges we have, I'm optimistic that we'll make the right decisions. And I think organic production is a step in the right direction.
Well, with the support of folks like you out there, helping farmers transition and helping grow this market, helping with the basic research that we need, I definitely want to visit that Western Slope Organic Agricultural Research Station, Gene.
Anytime.
But first, we're going to visit that Spur Campus.
Yeah.
Because again, we're talking a little bit about hosting our live event in November there. So we're looking forward to getting that arranged. And again, I want to thank everyone, Tina Owens, Phil Taylor, Gene Kelly, and also, you can't see her, I don't believe, but Allison Salvati, who works with me at Compass Natural, helped set up this whole program. I can't do it without her assistance, so I want to thank her profusely. And all of you for attending. Thank you so much for making this first webinar of Compass Natural being a partner with USDA's Organic Transition Program a success. We'll be sending you out a link to the recording and the presentations. So again, stay tuned. September 28th will be our next webinar, and we're going to focus on the money next time around. See you all. Have a great rest of the week. Have a great rest of the summer, and we'll talk soon. Bye now.
Thanks.
See you guys. Bill, Tina, take care. Good seeing you guys.